Okay, is the audio still okay?
It's fine.
Okay. Mikkel's the audio okay for you? Hopefully that fixes it. So it's lesson 10, and we've set up our Stripe payment account, and we're just looking at the documentation. So mostly what we're going to be able to do is copy the code, and then we're going to have to modify it a little bit so it integrates with our store. So you'll want to open up the link to the Stripe integration builder. Okay. I'm also just going to log into the Stripe dashboard, dashboard.stripe.com. So they've got a really user-friendly dashboard. So it shows us right on the main page, gives us an overview of what payments have been processed through the account. So nothing today, but as we process payments, we'll see them here. So here it shows me over the last week. But you'll notice it also says test data. So these are not live credit card charges. It's not actually charging anyone's card. And it says we're in test mode. So once our store was ready, we could turn it to live mode, and then credit cards would actually be charged. So in here, if you click on the Developers tab and go to API keys, you're going to see the two keys that we're going to need to put into our .NET DUDS application. There's the publishable key. So this is the public key that will appear in our HTML form. Users won't see it, but it will show up in the page source. And then we've got a secret key that we're going to use in our C# code when we actually send the payments to Stripe. So that identifies to Stripe that the payments are for our store. So they know when they charge someone's credit card where to deposit the money. The one other thing we'll need to do before we can use these keys, up here on the top, you notice my store says COMP2084 store. Yours up here at the top left, it probably says add account name or something like that. So if you click on it, or it might say new account. I think the option says new account or add account name. So just click on that. And then you have to give it a name, give your store a name. So I called mine COMP2084 store. You can call your store anything, but we can't send payments until we create an account name. So just go ahead and put in a name for your store. This name is going to show to customers on the payment page. So it should be something descriptive that someone shopping in your online store would see. So create the new account or set the account name. And we'll leave the API keys page open and we'll come back here. We'll grab these keys in a bit. So I'm going to go back to the documentation, and the first thing we need to do is to install the Stripe.NET library. So I can simply copy this command here, install-package stripe.net. I'll just copy it. I'm going to go to my package manager console. And I'll just paste in that command. And hit enter. And this is going to add all of the libraries that we need to send payments to Stripe. When I look at my Solution Explorer now under Dependencies and Packages, I now have Stripe.net installed. Oops. There's no slash on the end. You can also use the, if you like, there's also the visual package manager. So you can also install it this way. You can go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager. And if you choose Manage NuGet Packages for Solution, if you click on the Browse tab, you can actually search for Stripe.net here as well. Now it shows me I've got a little green arrow here saying it's already installed. You can just click it and install. Okay, the first time I installed it, I put it in, Kevin, I had a backslash at the end. So copy the second one without the backslash. You can also install it from the visual package manager here. So Tools, NuGet Package Manager. And if you choose Manage NuGet Packages, this is like rather than a command line interface, it's a graphical interface where you can manage and install your packages this way. So use whichever one is easier. So if you're going to use the graphical interface, you just click on Stripe.net, choose your package, and then you'd be able to click the install button. You should choose, if you have multiple projects, Jeffrey, you would select the project that needs to use it, which in this case would be your web project. You don't need to install it into every project. No.
Okay.
Good question. So the next thing we want to do is store our API keys. I'm going to put them in appsettings.json. You could use the secret key store if you like. For simplicity, I'm just going to store them here in appsettings.json. So I'm going to add a comma and a new value here called Stripe. A new section called Stripe, and inside I'm going to create two keys. A publishable key and I'll just give it an empty string value for now, and a secret key, which I'll also just give a string value. So just put this code that I've highlighted into appsettings.json just before the final curly bracket. So there's still one closing curly bracket after. So everything that you should add is in blue. I'll leave this up for a moment, and then we can jump back into the Stripe dashboard so we can copy the API keys. So the publishable and secret key, those are basically means the public and the private key. So the public key that goes in our HTML and the private key that lives in our C# code that's compiled on the web server. So add that section to appsettings.json. And now I'm going to come back. I'm going to first copy my publishable key, and it starts with PK_test because we're in test mode, PK for publishable key. So I'm going to paste that in as my first value. And then I want to go and copy and paste my secret key. So the secret key doesn't show up right away. You've got to click reveal. I think it's going to prompt me for my password. And now I can copy it, and it starts with SK for secret key. And I'll just paste that in. And then I'm going to save my file. So we've got the keys in our app settings.json. We've got to do a little more configuring. Ideally, and here's why. Just close up some of the stuff we did last week. I think we need our cart. So we're going to need this value, this secret key and publishable key. We'll need them in our shop controller. We're going to create a couple of payment methods, right? Because when we clicked our checkout form, it takes us to payment. So we need these keys in order to call Stripe. The challenge is our controller, it can't directly access our settings. It's not set up there. They can't see each other. So what we need to do is we need to use our startup file, make a few changes here that will allow our shop controller to have access to the keys that are in our site settings. So we need to do a little configuration for this. So first, I'm going to go to the startup file. So last week, or the week before, we enabled session support on line 53. So here we want to add, we're going to use dependency injection, which I'll talk about. So the controllers can access the app configuration values, like API keys. So we only need one line of code here, and we'll talk about what it does in a bit more detail in a minute. We're going to call add configuration. We're going to pass in the type of iConfiguration. Now this gives me an error. That's okay. In order for this to work, I've got to add, whoops, sorry, wrong method. We're going to call the method of add singleton. I'm sorry. I'll put that in the chat. So my comment says use dependency injection. What the heck is dependency injection? What does that mean? We're going to use it this week. Our application's already using it, but we've never really talked about it. Has anybody heard of the term dependency injection before and know what it means? Okay, fair enough. I didn't expect that you did, so don't feel bad. Today will be the last day as programmers that you don't know what dependency injection is. I'm going to open up for a minute our shop controller. Our shop controller, all of our controllers, in fact, are already using dependency injection. So I'm just going to open up the controllers we've got. So here's the categories controller that was built with the scaffolding. Here's the products controller that was built with the scaffolding. And here's our shop controller. So let's look at the top of each class. What's happening here on these lines? Line 17 and then line 20 and 21.
We are getting from application DB context those DB sets from the database, or we're making a connection to reference that?
You got it. So this method here, right? This is our constructor. Everyone knows what a constructor is, right? It's a method that has the same name as the class, and it's used every time we want to instantiate an instance of this class. We call the constructor. So our constructor, in order to use our shop controller, Lindsay, I'll ask you again, what object does our controller require?
It requires an application DB context object.
You got it.
As-
So that's dependency injection. When you when you call the constructor of this class, you must supply it with another object. This controller can't function if it doesn't have this. Okay, so we wrote this code, but even when we scaffolded the controllers, same thing, right? So our products controller, it also uses dependency injection. It requires, at creation, it requires a database connection because none of the methods in here are going to work without the database. So this is dependency injection in action. One object requires another object at runtime in order to be instantiated. So we're using dependency injection to require a database connection. Okay, so Jeffrey, why it's good is because an object, two reasons. Number one is an object gets what it needs at runtime. Okay, so we can ensure there's no empty constructor in this controller. There's no way to create an instance of your shop controller if you do not pass in a context. So let me show you. So for example, if I made a class like this, if I said, var controller equals new shop controller, now I need to make a reference here, which I'll take out. Right? I'm going to get an error here saying, hey, you can't create a shop controller if you don't provide the database connection. Right? So this code won't run. So dependency injection ensures that whenever we're instantiating a class, anything it depends on is provided. That's one reason it's good. The other reason it's good is the object that we're providing can be changed at runtime. And we're going to use this next week. So right now, this application DB context, it's connecting to our SQL Server database. Next week, we're going to start doing unit testing. So we don't want to use SQL Server. We want to use a standalone in-memory database instead. So we could pass in a different kind of database object for testing without having to rewrite the code in our class. So it's scalable in that way. Yes, that's right. It's a form of decoupling. So what this line does is it's allowing us to read the site configuration values that are stored here or stored in the secret key. So we need to add this line to the startup. And then we also need to modify our constructor in the shop controller. So not only does it now accept a database connection, it also accepts an object that includes all the information about the site configuration. We'll need this in order for the controller to read our API keys. So we're going to add here app configuration, dependency, used to read API keys from app settings or secret key store. Whoops. So we're going to create a variable of type iConfiguration. It's an interface. And we're going to modify our constructor so it also takes, yes, services global. So I need to add the missing reference here. It's prompting me for a reference to Microsoft.extensions.configuration. So I'm going to add that reference. It gets added here on line 11. And now our constructor is going to take a second dependency. So we're also going to instantiate an instance of our app configuration. So our class was already using dependency injection, but it was using it only for a database connection. We're now also passing in an instance of our configuration object. I'll put this all on paste bin so you have it. Easier than the chat for this amount of code. So I've included the reference at the top and then the first part of our controller with our modified constructor that now requires two objects. Pardon me. While we're up at the top of our class, ghost in your machine, I guess, Kevin. We also want to add, we can add a reference to Stripe because we're going to need it to send payments. So I'm also going to add using Stripe. So add that reference as well. We need it in order to send a payment to Stripe. So our configuration should now be good. We've created our Stripe account, generated the API keys. We've added the account name in the Stripe dashboard. We've added a Stripe section with our keys to app settings. We've enabled configuration to be injected into our controllers. We've added a couple of needed references in our shop controller and injected a second dependency into the constructor. So now we should be able to, for the most part, copy and paste the code from the view and the controller method from the Stripe documentation, and then we'll just tweak those a little bit so that we can get the payment working. Once we can pay successfully, then we can save our orders to the database, clear out the user shopping cart, and generate an order confirmation page. It sounds like a lot, but we don't actually have to write very much of the code ourselves. Some of it we're going to take from Stripe, and some of it we're going to scaffold in Visual Studio. So our next step is now, if you see where we get in our cart, we need a get payment method. Get method called payment, and then we'll need a view. because our code that we finished with last week, now I've got a little error here. You'll notice there's one error, Visual Studio tells me. And this error was caused when we added the Stripe library. You'll see if I comment this code out, I actually have no errors. When I add the Stripe library, it causes an error here. We'll see why in a minute. So I'm going to put that code back because we do need Stripe. But now I get an error. Right. So the problem is we have an order class in our models namespace, but now that we've added Stripe, Stripe also has an order class, so the name is ambiguous. So when we declare this as type order, Visual Studio no longer knows which one of these it is. So Lindsay is right. This is referencing our own order. This is not a Stripe order. So we're just going to change this from order in our checkout method. That's going to be models.order. So now we're going to create the payment method. So it's going to be a get method at shop/payment. So we're going to write add authorize because this page is private. If users aren't logged in, they can't get to the payment page. This will be a fairly simple method. So we need to do a few things in here. I'll add all the comments first, and then I think we'll need about 4 or 5 lines of code for the method. First, we want to get the order from the session. Right? If we look on the previous method on checkout, right here on line 74, we create the order and we store it in a session variable. We haven't saved it to the database yet. We don't want to save the order to the database until the customer pays successfully. So we're going to store the order in memory here. So we're going to get the order from the session. And we want to send the total to the view for display using the view bag. So we want to show the customer the total of their order before they pay, right? So in Stripe's documentation, it'll look something like this. We can use the view bag so the customer knows what the total of the order is. So we'll get the order from the session, and then we can read the total value so we can display it. We also want to read the Stripe publishable key from the configuration and put in view bag for display for the payment form. So it'll go in our HTML, but it'll be hidden. The customer won't see it, but it needs to be included. And lastly, load the payment view. So we need 4 lines of code in this method, and then we'll have to create our payment view. We should be able to do that before we take a break. So our order equals so we're going to call get object, and we have to cast it to a models.order. So on line 174, we're writing the order to a session variable, On line 185, we're reading that session variable back into a local variable of type models.order. We'll set a property in the view bag called total equals order.total. We're going to use the view bag to also grab that public key. So the publishable key. So we're going to call get section to read the section we called stripe. And inside there, we're reading the value of the publishable key. So this is going to read this string, the stripe section key called publishable key. So that's going to give us this value here. And then lastly, we can just call return view. So this doesn't send the payment yet. This is going to call Stripe and load a payment form where the customer will enter information about their credit card. I'll put this up on Pastebin. And I'll put the link in the chat. Does anybody have any questions about what we're doing in this method? Or do these steps make sense? On this page, we're not going to show the details, no. We're basically going to build the page is going to look something like this. It's just going to look like this window. And then there'll be a checkout button. The order method. We don't have an order method. Yeah, so this code is on GitHub as well, because it's from last week. So we didn't write any of this today. This was all here from last week. But yeah, I can put it up. No problem. So we now need to make a view called payment. Because if we call this method, it's going to try to return a view. But we don't have a payment view. So let's go and create that. And most of the code we need for the payment view is going to come from the Stripe documentation. So we'll go to Views and Shop. I'm going to right click. I'm going to add a view. And this is going to be an empty view. And I will call it payment. So I'm inside my views and shop. My view is called payment. The view is empty. But the name will match the name of our method. So I'll click add. So most of the HTML is going to come from Stripe. although we're going to make a few changes to it. So I've got this empty view. I'm actually just going to delete everything here. I don't need those comments. I'm going to go back to this page, the Stripe Integration Builder. Excuse me. And on this preview section on the right, if you click the checkout.html tab, gives you this navy section, and there are 52 lines of HTML. For starters, let's just grab that whole thing. I'm going to copy all of that HTML. Just highlight all of it and click copy. And I'm going to paste all of that into my new view that we created. And save it. So let's try it out so far. So now when we go to pay, rather than getting a blank screen, we should get a form that looks kind of like this. So again, from the Stripe Integration Builder, just copy all the HTML for checkout.html. There's 52 lines. And then I'm going to start the shopping again. It's probably faster for me to stay logged in. I don't have to keep logging in every time now. I think I'm logged in with my Google account, so I'm just going to stay logged in for a minute. Well, you have to start from the beginning. So your session's going to be null. So you got to shop from the beginning. You can't just refresh payment because our cart will have been emptied. So I'm going to go to checkout. I'm going to skip the logout. So now it just loads this page. So we're going to change this. Obviously, it should show the amount of my cart, which is not $20. It's got an image here, which I don't need, and it says stubborn attachments. So we'll modify this a bit, but at least it loads the page now. The client ID option must be provided. Okay, that would have to do with Google or Microsoft login. That, because Stripe doesn't use any value called client ID.
Do I still need to keep the authentication for Google, like the ID and the client secret in there?
You can you can disable Google for now if you want. If it's causing you an error, you can just comment it out in startup.
Well, I had commented it out, but I'm thinking now I probably should have kept it.
Well, I'm thinking it's enabled, but you don't have those values. So if you don't have the keys, then you're better off to comment it out.
Gotcha.
And you can just log in as customer1@gc.ca. I was just logging in with Google because it's convenient. So this is where we should get to now. We should get a payment page. It's not going to be functional yet, and we're going to have to adjust it, but at least the page loads and it has most of the HTML we need. It is a bit of a mess though, because you'll notice we've got 2 HTML headers. right? We've got ours from our layout, and then we've got the one we copied from Stripe. So we will need to clean up some of the stuff in this page. It's just a starting point. I think this is a good place for us to take a pause. So I'm going to push everything to GitHub. So if you did fall a bit behind, don't worry, don't panic. I'm going to put everything we've done up on GitHub now. Give you a chance to catch up if you need to. So I'm going to upload this. I'm going to stop the recording.